Recent surveys and studies seem to show that marriage is not in demand as much as it used to be. Only half of American adults are married. That's the lowest percentage in over a century. And only a quarter of American adults say that getting married is the most important thing in their life. That doesn't mean that we're not dreaming of that certain someone. We're a romantic society. We still want someone to fall in love with and share our lives with, whether it's marriage or cohabiting, whether it's till death do us part or just till it doesn't work out anymore. And yeah, that brings us to divorce. The divorce rate has declined slightly lately. That would be good news, except the only reason is that the marriage rate has declined. Simple reality is that most one-to-one connections fall apart. And those couples who stay together aren't always so good either. People like to brag, we've been together for 43 years, but they essentially live separate lives, maybe talk only 10 minutes a day just before the lights go out. Of course, we can respond to that in at least a couple of ways. One is to shrug and say, well, that's just the way it is, let's accept it. Another is actually to celebrate it. It's time to let marriage go the way of slavery and monarchies. It's a long, disastrous experiment. But some people are really concerned that we veered off track, that the decline of marriage is because we've messed up the way we do it. We changed the roadmap. So of course people get lost and give up. Many of those people hold a central belief that marriage and the nuclear family are God's design for society. And we need to fight to recover that. We need biblical marriage. What does the Bible say? Well, first, it's important to note that no one gets married in the Hebrew Bible. That is the Old Testament. There is no verb to marry or noun marriage in biblical Hebrew. That said, a search in the New International Version on the word marry turns up over 50 hits. But what they render as marry is actually take a woman. A close look at those NIV entries shows that a woman sometimes marry a man, but not really. The Hebrew is to be given to a man or to belong to a man. For example, Numbers 36:3 is translated as, if they marry men from other Israelite tribes. But that's not what it says in Hebrew. Literally, the Hebrew is, if they belong to any of the other Israelite tribes' men. Number 2, nor is there a word for wife. Every instance of wife in an English translation is actually the Hebrew word isha, woman. And the word for husband in the Bible is Baal, literally the word master. Number 3, the word virgin only applies to females. She must show the tokens of virginity, that's blood on the sheets, the next morning after the wedding. But there's no such requirement for men. Number 4, nor is there a marriage ceremony in the Bible. No official, whether a priest, a rabbi, or anybody else, presides. There's no government process. There are 2 moments when a woman might be said to be joined to her husband. First, there's a transaction between her father and her husband-to-be. And when that transaction's complete, she's betrothed to her husband. Then, following the wedding feast, the 2 of them enter the tent. Copulation seals the union. Number 5, men can take multiple wives. Abraham had Sarah, Milcah, and Keturah. Jacob had Rachel and Leah. Moses had Zipporah and some unnamed Ethiopian woman. King David had Achinoam, Abigail, Maacah, Hagith, Shephatiah, Ithream, Michal, and Bathsheba. Men may also take concubines. Jacob had 2 of those. Abraham had at least a couple. And God himself knows how many David had. A concubine is like a wife with no inheritance rights. Number 6, biblical adultery is not simply stepping out. It's the act of a married woman sleeping with someone other than her husband. In such a case, she and her lover have both committed the crime. On the other hand, a married man can indeed freely sleep with another woman as long as she isn't someone's virgin daughter. In that case, he'd have to marry her, which is to say, compensate her father, or someone else's wife. Number 7, the Bible does allow for a man to divorce a woman. We'll talk more about that later. A woman, though, can never divorce a man. As long as the man wants, she's his till death do they part. What's love got to do with it? Not much, at least not in the Hebrew Bible. Oh, the word love is used many times, as in Jacob loved Rachel. But in that story, he had just seen her for the first time. It can hardly mean what we mean by love, if we even know what we mean. Let's face it, love is a pretty slippery idea. For sure, Jacob didn't crave deep emotional and spiritual intimacy with Rachel. As their story unfolds, there are no signs of tender comfort, whispered I love yous, exchanges of inside jokes. The same can be said of Abraham and Sarah, David and Bathsheba, or any other well-described couple in the Bible. It's a world in which the expression of intimacy is left for friendships. And David and Jonathan are probably the best example of that. People then, the same as now, wanted someone with whom they could share their fears, their secret thoughts, their exciting news. But the Bible's stories are a reminder that intimacy and marriage are not two sides of a coin. We put them together. They did not. And if it doesn't work out, yes, there is divorce in the Bible, and it isn't pretty. It's important to remember the underlying assumption. A man owns a woman. Obviously, if my TV has lousy color, I am free to get rid of it. And it's the same thing in the Hebrew Bible. A man can send the woman out. That's literally what it says. And the woman then becomes a gerusha, a banished woman. It's important that the man leave a note that says, this TV is anyone's to claim. I mean, this woman is a gerusha. That lets anyone else know that they can hook up with her without being accused of theft. Adultery. But if the TV doesn't like what stations I watch, it really has no recourse. If a woman doesn't like the man who owns her, he's got bad teeth, or he farts in the kitchen, or he refuses to let her watch The Handmaid's Tale, she can't drive him out, and she can't drive herself out. She could, of course, make life miserable for him, hoping that he'll get tired of her and do the driving out himself. But if she tries the maneuver of an affair, ooh, that's an invitation to a stoning. And then, let's just say she ends up a gerusha, either fulfilling her own wishes or just those of the man. She's completely free to associate with any man she chooses. For the first time in her life, she has freedom. Sort of. Being driven out because you're no longer young or pretty doesn't exactly make you the prime focus of all the good men in town. It's kind of like, well, who would want Magic Johnson now? Still, if she's still got something going for her, a winning smile, a heck of a carrot cake recipe, the ability to read and write in 3 languages, she could win someone over. And all they have to do is move in together. No ceremony, no marriage contract, no wedding feast. It's strange that no one nowadays talks about how frequently that happened back then. Part of it is because there's no paper trail for Ancestry.com to post. Part of it might also be that it doesn't fit the picture of biblical marriage that people want to find. By the way, this may be important for talking about Jesus in the Christianity unit. People assume that Jesus wasn't married. Funny that, since a lot of the people who assume that are the same people who want to go back to biblical marriage. Anyway, the New Testament has nothing about Jesus' marital status. It doesn't tell us he was married, and it doesn't tell us he wasn't. But there is an extra character in there, Mary Magdalene, and we'll come back to her in the Christianity unit. There are other religions, though. From the outset, Islam was a marriage reform movement. Women were no longer considered property, so no payment was to be made to their fathers. A dowry was to be paid directly to the woman, and it was hers to spend or not to spend as she wished. Women could not be married against their will, and the idea that women could be collected like bobblehead dolls was limited. A man could marry up to 4 wives, only 4. I know that sounds absurd to most Americans, but remember, up to that moment, men could have 16 or 20 or 200 wives. Limiting to 4 was a way of protecting the women. And wait, there's more. The Quran implies that even 4 is a grudging concession from God, and comes with the warning that if a man can't treat all 4 justly and kindly, he should be satisfied with 1 wife. Islamic law plays this one big. In Morocco, for instance, family law allows polygamy first, if the first wife approves. Second, if the status of the first wife is not compromised, and third, if the second or third or fourth wife is not treated better than or elevated above the first wife. It also requires approval of an Islamic judge. In other words, polygamy is extremely rare. I know it's possible to find examples that violate all that, but that's a move that can be made with every religion. It's important to compare apples with apples and bad practices with bad practices. Let's not compare one tradition's bad practices with another tradition's ideals. And as long as we're here, Hinduism, Judaism, Islam, and even Christianity have all allowed polygamy in their past. The New Testament does not forbid it to anyone but deacons and bishops, and that's probably because of the fear that multiple wives would demand too much of their attention. In the end, Hinduism, Judaism, and Christianity have all stepped away from polygamy, and Islam, in practice, if not in theory, is moving in that direction as well.